Hey, what's up guys? It's Snoo. I'm back from vacation, wouldn't you know it, just in the nick of time for the second major iteration of the early access for Path of Exile 2 0.2.0. Right around the corner, about 24 hours from now, will be out, and we just got the patch notes today. Lucky me, I got to go over it on stream with many of you guys, of course in anticipation for what I would like to be doing, and we'll be coming out with videos on that. You can expect a lot more PoE2 related stuff coming out soon, and that's what I'm going to be streaming naturally. But I do think it's important to close the chapter on this build you see before you, because I mean it was just an absolute powerhouse to build. I'm never going to forget it. It was so much fun, so much power, definitely way too overpowered, and I think it's not going to surprise anyone that this build is getting nerfed pretty hard, about 10 different ways maybe. But do I think it's completely dead in the water? No, it's just going to be slower, weaker, less defense, less offense, and I'm going to go over the major patch notes that will affect this build moving forwards. In case you are somebody who likes doing this build, you just want to keep running it in standard for whatever reason, like as in like not the reset, or you know, if you are thinking about doing monk, invoker monk, crit related attribute stacking, Tempest, Flurry, Tempest, Bell stuff, well, you know, you're going to get some good information out of this. So again, it's not going to be exactly what I'm doing moving forward. This is going to be kind of a look back on this build and the patch notes that is affecting it. So let's get started. Now we're going to go through all these changes in the patch notes. As you can see, I'm going to highlight them and just read it and make any other side comments necessary. Basically, it's going to go in order of most fundamental changes to maybe least fundamental changes. I mean, for the most part. Let's start here. We got 12 jewel sockets have been removed from the passive skill tree. Existing characters with jewels in these removed sockets can reclaim their jewels to their main inventory using the new reclaim jewels chat command. All right, so I guess you're just going to have your jewels back for the slots that are missing. And basically what this looks like, if I'm not mistaken, there are 24 jewel slots in the passive tree right now. And so this is just going to get slashed in half. There are basically 12 in an inner perimeter and 12 on an outer perimeter. And so my guess is what they're going to do is go through both perimeters and look at every other one, removed every other one, kind of leapfrog it, and then they might like shift the inner cluster over so that there aren't any jewel slots that are way closer. Because if you notice, they're spread out like very symmetrically right now. And that makes the most sense. They would do probably still an outer and an inner cluster, but nothing really close to the starting zone. And so this is going to have a major hurt on any sort of, you know, adorned build, on virtually every build, because min-max jewels are just extremely good anyway, whether it's like 5 modded or with a terrific attribute. Corruption, which that is also less now. And so, yeah, that's going to definitely affect this build, and it's going to affect, I mean, pretty much every single build in a big way. Lead Me Through Grace is an ascendancy passive for the Invoker Monk. No crazy nerfs here for the Invoker, but this is a pretty big one, I would say. For the Spirit, 1 Spirit for every 8 energy shield unequipped body armor. It used to be 1 for every 6, and then 1 Spirit for every 20 evasion. It used to be 1 to every 15, so that looks like a 25% nerf to me overall. And so I think I was running with like 270 spirit right now, and so you know, you still get your 100 for doing the side quests in the campaign, but that additional 170 is going to be slashed a fair bit. And yeah, I mean, that's okay. I'm not planning to run Invoker Monk personally next time, so it's not going to affect me very greatly. But for those of you who are running this build or any Invoker, it's going to be impactful for sure. Here's the big one. It's going to sting a lot of you guys. Grim Feast, unfortunately, can't be fixed. It's broken and it can't be fixed, at least not for now. So it says here, Grim Feast can no longer be engraved in the gem cutting menu. Existing Grim Feast gems have been disabled. We aim to rework Grim Feast in the coming future. It really sucks when this happens. You just can't get to it at the problem at the source. And so this is a massive hurt for all CI builds, mapping builds in particular. Not going to really matter for bossing or for life-based builds. And, you know, the build I chose was CI in part because of how stupidly strong Grim Feast was. And whatever build I was going to choose moving forward would have probably been CI if it could have fit it, assuming Grim Feast was still in there and not absolutely nerfed to oblivion. But now it is nerfed to oblivion by virtue of it just not existing in the game anymore. And so that's going to be a major problem for energy shield recovery builds, as energy shield recovery through passive recovery seems to be pretty bad, poorly balanced at the moment. At least not all that great, with, you know, really fast-paced combat where you're kind of taking a lot of hits. Ghost Dance got a little bit of a buff as a kind of an honorable mention to the changes. I didn't really have that on the list, but, you know, very small things. Okay, so let's get into some of those nerfs for attributes. We got Falcon Technique, notable passive skill, now grants 1% increased attack speed per 25 dex. Used to be 15. That's a pretty sizable nerf. And this is honestly expected, given that basically everyone, whether you were stacking dex or not, was going for this particular notable on the passive tree if you were pathing anywhere near there. So that's a pretty good indicator that it was overpowered, and especially strong for attribute stacking. I think it's still fine, still viable if you are stacking dex a decent amount. We also have, if I can find it on here, Polymathy. Now, Polymathy has been nerfed by 30%, now grants 7% increased attributes instead of 10. That was at the bottom center part of the tree. And then here, a little bit further down, we have Spaghettification. Got more than nerfed, it got obliterated pretty hard for anyone who is stacking attributes like crazy. It grants 13 flat attribute. I guess that's nothing to really scoff at, but it used to say 7% increased attributes, which is way better if you already have a lot of flat attributes. And it, I guess, is a cool reprieve. It grants less minus chaos resist. Doesn't matter for CI builds, but, you know, it's still funky notable, and it's still decent, I guess, just not really like one of the best maybe anymore. Massive nerf here for clear. A lot of builds that were running Herald of Ice with Shock and Herald of Thunder with Freeze. The on-kill effects of Heralds can no longer trigger from kills caused by Herald skills. This resulted in a hypothetically infinite loop of Herald kills, and in some cases you would see this kind of go absolutely crazy with like 5, 6, 7 screens cleared at once. It would lag the game. It would actually like freeze the server, and it was pretty obviously not working as intended. It was, in my opinion, obvious that they shouldn't chain off of each other. As you can see pretty clearly that Herald of Ice, for example, cannot freeze. Okay, there's a reason for that. It's not supposed to be able to chain off of itself, and so the idea that you could just run a second Herald and then kind of reverse the ailments and chain them, clever for sure, but most likely never intended to work that way, and so this has finally been removed. I was honestly surprised that this was not fixed almost immediately as a bug fix, if nothing else. I mean, they could have sold it as a bug fix, I think. But yeah, it's going to cripple a lot of builds that were focusing a little more on single target, that used this mechanism to clear like crazy. You're not going to be able to do it anymore. And so it's not like you can't run Heralds. You could still run 2 Heralds, but I mean, with my build, I wouldn't run Herald of Ash anymore for sure. We'd probably still run Herald of Thunder or Herald of Ice. I'm not exactly sure which one. I might even run both still. But probably not, because we're going to need to save some spirit, huh? This is going to surprise some of you. You probably thought this was going to be a list of nothing but nerfs, but here we got a buff. I'm looking at a buff right here, technically. Herald of Ash's explosion radius is now 1.2 meters. Well, I did just say I was probably not going to run this anyway, but, you know, Herald of Ash now works a little bit differently, too. Some changes here. I don't really see it to be major, but the increase in the meters is more meaningful than anything else written there, I think. Herald of Thunder Bolt's impact radius is now 1.4 meters, previously 1.6. Now that one matters a little more, and it is nerfed. But I guess they're just trying to show a little bit of love to Herald of Ash, giving it some extra radius. That's nice. All right, and another buff, meaningful buff, one that I personally like. I guess maybe because I enjoyed Profane Ritual, whereas a lot of people didn't. That GGG is kind of looking at the skill and thinking it needed buffed in some way, but we got Profane Ritual now has a ritual radius of 2.2 meters, previously 1.8 meters. It's kind of a big AoE increase. Granted, you know, you're sort of guaranteed that one hit on it, because it's gonna naturally target a corpse. And what this does is it gives you power charges, and if there are additional corpses in range of the corpse that's chosen within the meter range, then you will get more than one power charge, potentially capping power charges just from one Profane Ritual. But yeah, I like this. It has no use outside of mapping, it looks like. I mean, unless you're doing something crazy with minion deaths or something. But it is technically a buff, and I might be using Profane Ritual for whatever I'm doing in the future. Not that this is any real meaningful difference as to why I would use it or not, but it is a buff, so cool. All right, this has got to be the most comprehensive nerf of them all, specifically talking about Tempest Bell. So another monk skill, specifically monk skill here, was technically buffed in terms of its raw percent attack damage, but it's nerfed in basically every other way. The most notable of these is a hard cap on the shockwave, triggering only once, or I suppose 4 times a second max. Okay, once every 250 milliseconds. I really don't like this change. It's the only change that I truly don't like because it basically just removes fun from the game. It's always really fun to figure out ways that you can kind of push the game's numbers to its limits. And whenever GGG does something where they just outright hard cap something, I mean, you can only do it so many times. Doesn't matter what your stats are. You can't make it proc any more often. That is definitely not a fun way, and I think GG should stay away from nerfing things in this particular way. It's going to have a huge impact on it. I wouldn't mind if there was, you know, I don't mind the fact that the bell is going to be triggering way less often. I just don't like it when it is kind of ham-fisted in and as a just massive nerf. Very unfun nerf this way. Every other difference here, compared to what we've previously had, I have no problem with. It is also nerfed by a pretty significant amount on its base attack damage multiplier, and then how many hits it has before it despawns. The fact that you can't run a second bell anymore and get bonuses there. You can't have like 2 copies of bells, 2 different skills. That's something a lot of people were doing. I wasn't doing that. But all in all, it looks like somewhere in the neighborhood of around an 80% nerf to bell, I would say. But the nice thing about this is the nerf scales up in terms of impact the higher you gear up. So I think the bell will still be quite good while leveling in the campaign for monks. So that is something to be happy about. And generally speaking, maybe not in the way they're handling it in this particular case, but generally I like it when we have nerfs to like the super high and top end performance of skills or whatever, because they can just get completely out of control in terms of how the numbers scale. It's fun, don't get me wrong, but you know, it needs to be balanced in some way, and it would suck if they nerfed it really hard for everybody, like across the board. So it's good that it's nerfed in such a way that it will still perform fairly well for lower level players. I'm not going to go into great detail about how that is. You can read this if you want. Just a lot of text there. Nerfing Tempest Bell. All right, here's a weird one. Overcharge support was changed and then changed again. Now it says overcharge support no longer causes supported skills to have less shock duration. Okay, didn't really matter if you're constantly shocking something. It now has shocks caused by supported skills are reflected back to you. Okay, well, that's kind of a problem if you take full shock effect. But if you are stamping down the shock effect tremendously, maybe not the worst thing in the world. Or if you're doing some sort of self-shocking shenanigans, that might be good, although I'm not really aware as of right now, this second. I haven't looked into that, if that's even possible in the game right now. In PoE1, there are ways to do self-ignite, self-chill, self-shock, and you can get a lot of benefits out of that. Perhaps that is not really in the game yet. Don't take my word for it. Look into that if you want, because I haven't yet. So kind of excited about this for the future, I suppose, of any kind of cool niche build. But in the meantime, looks like it's just going to kind of hurt. It may just want to pull overcharge support out of any support links you're running. Here we go for some more nerfs. The Against the Darkness unique jewel now has a medium radius, previously large. I mean, I just stopped reading right there. I mean, that's pretty big. That's going to, in the case of my build, the way I have the radius is overlapping with the one from nothing. Instead of, I think what this is going to do is instead of 6, I will be able to get 4 notables active for this with kind of the same setup. That would be a pretty significant loss in spirit and dex based on what I'm doing. But yeah, I mean, that's going to hurt everybody, literally everybody. And I guess everyone was using that jewel because it was so strong anyway at the top end. So it's not going to affect people at the lower end all that much because the jewel is quite expensive. Doing Trial of Chemist to get it, and to get a really good one was prohibitively costly on currency. It does say this change has not affected existing items. In this case, modifiers that cause notable passive skills and radius to grant 2 to 4% increased specific attributes now have values of 2 to 3, which is yet another nerf. And don't touch yours with a Divine Orb if you can help it. But for anyone playing the fresh economy like me, we're not going to get the Giga Powerful Against the Darkness jewels. They're nerfed pretty hard. And so maybe I'm not quite as enthusiastic about getting my hands on this jewel as I would have been otherwise. And probably the least surprising massive nerf to anyone is this belt that everyone was using. Whether they had good rings or not, the Ingenuity Unique Belt no longer has 40 to 80% increased bonuses gained from equipped rings. Instead, now has 20 to 30% increased bonuses gained from just the left as well as just from the right, 2 separate rolls. This is going to help prevent the new Huntress Ascendancy from getting even more bonuses through the 3rd ring slot. Yikes. It also now has +1 or 2 charm slots and some charm stuff. Otherwise, existing versions of this item are unaffected by these changes. Obviously, nobody really cared that much about the charm stuff. I mean, if charms end up being way better than they were, this could be kind of good. But yeah, going from 80 to 30 is just... that's pretty bad. It's about a 60% nerf to the power of Ingenuity as it stands. More big nerfs to attribute stacking in the form of hand and wisdom action unique gloves. Not going to really surprise anybody. I mean, again, when people aren't even stacking attributes like at all and it's still best in slot, that's a problem with scaling. It now adds 1 to 10 lightning damage per attacks per 20 intelligence. Previously for 10 intelligence. All right, it's a 50% nerf in damage there. Now provides 1% increased attack speed per 20 dex instead of 3 per 25. That's even bigger than, I believe, even bigger than 50% nerf on the attack speed side. Yeah, Divine Orb will change some of the values, not the secondary line, but the initial line. And so, you know, this item is going to be nerfed fairly hard right off the top, even for existing items. But yeah, I mean, its legacy version is still going to be a fair bit more powerful than its new one. All right, well, I don't know if I'm going to be using those gloves, but I guess it's nice. Maybe I can look into some other gloves, potentially. Now, if you had asked me which item actually deserved a nerf more than any other, I would probably say this one right here, Pillar of the Caged God. And the reason for that is because it is a leveling item. What is a leveling item doing being, you know, you equip it at level 1 and then it's still the best item in your inventory? Like, even at like Giga Min Max level 100, that makes no sense at all. I mean, you shouldn't be able to equip an item at level 1 and for it to be literally best in the slot forever. This should never happen in an ARPG. Not healthy for the game at all. Let's get real. So the Pillar of the Caged God still going to be a fantastic item for leveling. Great. Still going to be okay at attribute stacking stuff. And for the sake of this build, this is the linchpin of the build. I mean, this is the weapon. This is attribute stacking 101, and so it's triple 3 different things that we're stacking: intelligence, strength, and dex, all kind of cut in half, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, basically the entire power cut in half, so about a 50% nerf there. This will affect existing items, not a whole lot though, because the initial number here, the ranged number roll, would have to be changed with Divine Orb. So legacy versions of this staff are still going to be pretty strong, almost as strong as they are currently. We have another nerf to attributes for the corruptions, and this is only going to affect like the absolute super top end players. So myself, I eventually got to a place where I was trying to get like really good jewels, rare jewels, and corrupt them with a +10 attribute roll, specifically +10. And yeah, I got a few of them. Well, never again, I guess. Corruption modifiers on jewels that provide +5 to 10 of a specific attribute, now values of 4 to 6. I thought it was a bit out of touch, that roll range anyway. Never quite understood why it gave such a large number. You know, in respect to the other corruptions, the resistance ones, I don't even think, maybe they did go as high, but I'm pretty sure resistant, like stat weighting values attribute more than resistances individually, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, them being that high. So I suppose it's good that this got nerfed pretty hard, by about 50%, almost. One of the last major changes to the gear that gave me quite a bit more power, at least offensively and speed-wise, was the Moria Invictus unique body armor, sacrificing a ton of, mainly defense, energy shield to get that Moria Invictus body armor, not for the rarity, but for more attributes and more resistances, covering my bases there. So a lot of these rolls can no longer roll on it. You can no longer get rarity on items, max life, max mana, or attributes. Can still get all res, though. That'll still be a pretty strong one. And the interesting thing here is it says the Moria Invictus unique body armor now generates with 3 random modifiers, previously 2, and it has 7 more. Added 7 new random per socketed rune or soul core modifiers. This chest might have been buffed like crazy, honestly. I wouldn't be surprised if this is overall, I mean, not counting attribute stacking, overall a huge buff to this chest, and it might be a lot more rare now. Sounds like that's kind of what they're doing. So look forward to the Moria Invictus unique body armor still being a major player in the next iteration of the game. Just going to be nerfed for this build specifically. And last, and probably least, actually, is rarity. Since it's not as good as everyone seems to think it is. The Soul Core of Azkaban has 5% increased quantity of gold dropped by slain enemy. Okay. Previously, 10% increased rarity of items found. I was using that, and I think for anyone doing a bit of magic finding, it was a great way to get a little bit of extra oomph in your rarity of items found. I particularly feel like, to do magic find rarity on gear properly, this is a great way to do it. It's something that you can just kind of put in, pull out of your gear slots, and if you feel like it's worthwhile to sacrifice some power for that extra rarity, great. Just put a soul core in, call it a day. I honestly kind of like that. I like that flexibility. I felt like that was a pretty intelligent way for them to kind of thread that needle, make everybody happy. But for whatever reason, the soul core is now dead. I'm not sure why they did this. Maybe they're planning to remove rarity on gear completely. In which case, we got, I guess as an honorable mention, I didn't really mention this, but the rarity roll range for rares, the top roll has been nerfed a fair bit as well. Only by a few percentage points. Didn't even include that in the major list, but an honorary mention, I guess. Alright guys, that's going to conclude things for this video. That's all of the major changes to the build that I've been running. The build, again, one I'll never forget. It holds a very fond place in my heart. I really enjoyed the power of that. And people were saying that PoE2 builds were going to be so much weaker than PoE1 builds. It's funny, like going back to PoE1, we start fresh and you kind of, lose sense of how strong your build was. But I was using a very endgame PoE1 build and then swap back to my endgame PoE2 build. And yeah, I think the PoE2 build is actually stronger in terms of just sheer strength. Maybe, maybe not, but it was a broken build and they're fixing it. Because yeah, the game is not meant to be quite like PoE1 in terms of all that speed, power, and what have you. So, we'll see what comes next, but we already got a new Huntress Ascendancy, and just to slightly tease you on what I'm planning to do next, even though I said I'm going to save it for another video, I am indeed going to be playing the Huntress for sure, and yeah, I would say 99% chance going to go Amazon, and the reason for that isn't really because it's supposedly going to be the best thing out there. I might have shied away from it if it was going to be bad, for whatever reason. But the Amazon looks enticing to me, mainly for nostalgic purposes. I played Diablo 2, and that was my very first ARPG, and I distinctly remember choosing the Amazon class as my very first class pick for ARPG. So, for that reason alone, I'm quite excited for the upcoming couple of days as we kickstart the Huntress Amazon in the campaign, which is actually a pretty fun aspect of PoE2, with some slight changes to the endgame. Should be fun. But yeah, more on that later. But anyway, if you have any questions about the monk, Well, I do have a POB listed down below and a few other links that might be there as well, like the patch notes. And I will be paying attention to the comment section on this one as we get kicked off for 0.2.0. Hope you got a lot of value out of this video. It's not a full comprehensive review. You can get that from a lot of other content creators. Just covering some of my bases for a previous build, as I know some people will have questions about it for sure. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.